time I have him.
Greetings, church. It is a joy to be with you all here in Richmond. My name is Perrin Tribble Anderson, and I just last week, joined the Union Presbyterian Seminary staff. I'm a donor relations officer on the Charlotte campus, and so I look forward to all the ways that I can support, encourage, and engage with this community of faith leaders and your vibrant ministries. And so in this spirit, I want to draw your attention to the back of your lovely Sprunts Lecture Series guide, where in the most NPR-esque way possible, we invite you all to call the number listed to tell your UPSIM story. We will not be the voice on your voicemail, but we still want to hear from each of you. So we hope to create an archive of inspiring voices that tell the rich stories of the church, stories of growth and transformation, and stories of faith that can be held for a long time. Together, our stories create a beautiful tapestry illustrating what it means to be for the church and the world. So I invite you to consider your story and call the number listed to share that with us. It is also my privilege to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's lecture, Dr. Safwat Marzouk. Dr. Marzouk is an Egyptian Presbyterian whose research interests include thinking theologically about monsters in the Bible, ancient Near East, and popular culture, constructing the other in the Old Testament, Middle Eastern Christian hermeneutics, and immigration in the Bible. He is the author of numerous articles, book chapters, and the author of 3 books. Dr. Marzouk was ordained as a pastor in 2002 by the Delta Presbytery of the Synod of the Nile, which is the governing body of the Presbyterian Church in Egypt. And in May of 2021, he joined the Wabash Valley Presbytery of the PCUSA. He is a Christian Egyptian and migrant to the U.S. He interprets the Bible in ways that are interreligiously and interculturally sensitive, seeking God's shalom and justice for the vulnerable and the marginalized. So Dr. Marzouk, thank you for moderating this afternoon. So friends, let us now rise in body or in spirit as we sing together hymn number 637.
Sing
may be seated. Welcome. Welcome everyone to another session of the Sprint Lectures 2025 of Union Presbyterian Seminary. Whether you are in person or watching online now or later, thank you for being part of this event. I am honored to introduce our speaker for the Sprint Lectures this year, Dr. Miguel de la Torre. He is professor of social ethics and Latinx studies at the Iliff School of Theology in Denver, Colorado. He is a professor, author, documentarian, and a scholar activist. Yesterday, we learned that he is the vanilla of his family. I personally would have loved to have the whole family here for all of us to encounter this inspiring spectrum of radical ethics. I would like to invite Dr. Latorre forward. I want to offer for our prayer a blessing for him as he speaks to us this afternoon. May your prophetic voice continue to expose imperial systems that prey on the vulnerable. May it awaken those who are in denial and those who choose to remain in ignorance because they can afford it or because they are afraid to hear the truth. May it ground those who are under the grinding oppression of empire so that they may know that they are not delusional and that their pain is real. May it be an oasis of empowerment in the desert of terror for those longing for a life of dignity. May it invite many to be in community of solidarity with the crucified Christ, with the groaning spirit, with the mother laboring warrior who is birthing something new amid chaos, loss, and grief. May you find courage despite all your fears by continuing to be rooted in your faith and humanity as you speak this afternoon on a rejection of Eurocentric thought. Please join me in welcoming Professor Miguel de la Torre.
Lunch was fantastic. And the hard thing of talking in the afternoon is making sure people don't fall asleep, including myself. So let me begin with just something gentle and soft and non-controversial. All white theology and all white philosophy is detrimental, if not deadly, to communities of color. Therefore, for the salvation of people of color, we have to reject white theology, white ethics, and the white Jesus. When I wrote my book, Burying White Privilege, Resurrecting the Badass Christianity, back in 2018, a bunch of people critiqued it by saying, De la Torre does a great job telling us what's wrong, but he doesn't provide any solutions. So I thought about that. And then when I wrote the next book on it, I began by saying, and I mentioned this last night, why do we ask the abused spouse to provide the solutions to their abuse? Why are we asking people of color to come up with the solution to their oppression? We like to say we need to speak truth to power. But the reality is that power already knows the truth. They just don't care. So I don't want to waste my time speaking truth to power because that is fruitless. I rather speak truth to the powerless who have adopted a Eurocentric way of thinking that reinforces their own oppression. You see, When I was a small child, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, I already knew that when I got to the line and liberty and justice for all, it did not apply to me or my people. So I'll say it again. All manifestation of white Christianity is detrimental, if not deadly, to people of color. When the French had their revolution and they cried out liberté, égalité, and fraternité, it was never meant for their colonized people in Algiers, in Vietnam, or in Haiti. It was only meant for white French people. You see, we have to create a way of thinking, a worldview, a philosophy that says beautiful words like liberty and freedom, but to be sure that in those words it excludes everyone who's not like you. The job that we have then is trying to understand how we define these words through our own cultural symbols. We like to say, oh, 8 out of every 10 evangelicals voted for Trump. How horrible. But so did the majority of mainline Protestants and mainline Catholics. And I want nothing to do with that type of Christianity. During the 2016 election, Joe Biden would campaign and say, "This is not who we are." This is exactly who we are. This is exactly who we are. Whether we like it or not, Trump won a fair and open election and got the most votes. And he won because he mirrored the psychic of this country. Therefore, this is who we are. But I want to be careful we don't give him too much credit. After all, he's nothing but the sneeze of a cold, the pus of a boil. He is not destroying democracy because we really never had democracy. Democracy has only existed for a few people. So to say that he is eliminating democracy or destroying it, I have to ask, so what? Whose democracy? Now, this may be an opportunity to maybe actually develop a democracy, but then again, I'm hopeless. It may not. Before I continue to talk about rejecting white Christianity, I really need to begin with myself. I need to confront myself. And I need to talk, well, let me put it this way. As I'm going to keep having this conversation, as I said, I really want to talk to people of color in the room. Because when we're alone, we talk very differently than when white people are around. Okay? And for the rest of you, you're going to have the privilege of overhearing us talking and saying things that you probably won't like, but frankly, I could care less because I'm not talking to you. Okay? So we know where I'm coming from. Okay. So before I begin with that conversation, I want to talk a little bit about confronting myself. When I was a young man in my 20s, my hair was about to here, had this really hot red capri, and I was driving from Miami to New York City. Hot car, hot Latino, things were going, windows are down, the wind is blowing in my hair back as I'm listening on my 8-track tape to a Gran Combo blasting. And as I'm driving through New Jersey, I get pulled over And the police officer comes up and says, "Son, can I please search your car?" He has a gun. I don't. I said, "Sure, go right ahead." So he searches my car, and as he's doing that, I kind of asked him, I said, "Officer, what exactly are you looking for?" And he goes, "Well, young Latino men with Dade County license plates from Miami are usually suspected of trafficking cocaine to New York City." And I said, "Oh, okay." So he searched the car. He didn't find anything. And he let me go with a ticket. You could imagine as I'm driving away the indignation of being racially profiled and, yeah. But if I'm honest with myself, what went through my mind was, thank God the cops are doing their job to keep us safe. You see, my mind was so colonized that I learned to see myself through the eyes of my oppressor. I learned to construct my identity by the way I was being seen. Therefore, the very first act of any liberation has to be the decolonization of my mind. I was so colonized that I ran for public office as the most right, conservative Republican for the Florida House. That's how colonized my mind was. And the angel said amen. You see, we embrace Eurocentric concepts like hope, which pacifies us in the very midst of our oppression, which leads us to a spiritual liberation, but not a physical liberation, that has us believing in the riches of the hereafter and not the here and now. And this form of colonization makes God vomit. But there's a problem with decolonization I want to be careful with. You see, my own contribution, I wrote a book called Decolonizing Christianity, Becoming Badass Believers. I've come to hate that title. I hate that title because I'm wondering if Christianity can be decolonized. You see, Christianity is colonization. Remember civilized and Christianized? They go hand in hand. Can I decolonize colonization? Can Christianity be saved? Has post-colonial thought become the latest flavor in the capitalist marketplace that we use to sell books and get speaking gigs? Now, don't get me wrong, I love my Jesus. I'm not crazy about Jesus, but I love my Jesus. But I have to really struggle with who this Jesus is. You see, are we trying to decolonize Christianity but not deal with the oppressive structures, but just make it a little bit more politically correct? Or do we have to reject this Christianity? See, this scares me. My problem is that I have too much coffee dates with Tink Tinker, who's an indigenous scholar who keeps reminding me that he has to say no to Christianity because it's a worldview directly opposed to his indigenous worldview, and he can't accept both. Again, I love my Jesus, but I have to struggle with this. You see, for Tink to be a Christian That means he has to be grateful for the genocide of his people that brought Jesus to the indigenous people. Do Asians need to be thankful for the colonialism by the British in East Asia because they brought Jesus? Or the enslaved in this country? You see what I'm getting at? There is a problem, I think, with this Christianity that I want to embrace. And again, don't get me wrong, I love my Jesus. So it leads me to wonder, is a hybridity of Christianity, in other words, I'll sing my corritos in Spanish and I'll add a little bit of salsa to my Christianity. Is that just making it more politically correct for me, more acceptable? Last year at the AAR-SBL, there was 53 sessions on post-colonial thought. It reminds me of what they did with liberation theology back in the 80s, where everything was liberation theology. Is teaching liberation theology domesticating liberation theology? Now, look I teach a class on liberation theologies, so I mean, I'm talking to myself here. But once I put it into a classroom, do I domesticate this idea? Every time I teach a class, I always have a student come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, Dr. De La Torre, I'm a liberationist." And I'm going, no, you're not. Because liberation theology has nothing to do with what you learn in a classroom, which is correctly named because it is a room where you learn your class after all. Liberation theology is what we do, not what we learn in a room. So I'm wondering the same thing's happening with post-colonialism now, that it's become a fun topic to teach to get students. And then to make things more complicated for me, because I now have middle-class privilege, I may have grown up in the slums, but I do teach as a professor, and I'm not paid a lot, but it has given me middle-class privilege. Is talking about this at events like this a way of me capitalizing on these ideas to make money? Now that I am no longer living in the slums of New York City. So am I teaching this as a profit-motivating venture as opposed to truly struggling with the oppressed and the disenfranchised? Well, enough about my struggle with myself. Let's talk about Eurocentric thought and why it has to be rejected. Your turn. My intellectual mentor, Jose Martí, once said, "El vino de plátano, y si sale agrio, sigue siendo nuestro vino." Now, for those of you who have yet to learn the language of the angels, let me translate that for you. We will make our wine out of plantains. And even if it comes out sour, it's still our wine. I will make my theology out of my indigenous roots. And even if I get it wrong, it's still mine. Martí is writing in the late 1800s, wedged between the empire of Spain and the emerging empire of the States, and he's basically coming to the conclusion that any philosophy we in the Caribbean develop has to reject both the Spanish Empire and the U.S. Empire and their ways of thinking and their ways of philosophizing and develop our own indigenous way of thinking. In the same manner, I am arguing that any Christianity that I am going to try to practice has to reject the Christianities of the empire and try to understand this Jesus that I claim to love through my own symbols, through my own language, through my own way of seeing. The first step of liberation then becomes that decolonization of my mind, to learn to see with my own eyes. That's the only way people of color can get saved is by understanding their spirituality through their own culture. And the only way white people can get saved is to crucify their whiteness and learn to worship the Latino Jesus, the black Jesus, the Asian American Jesus, the queer Jesus, the transgender Jesus. I have to exclude or reject this Eurocentric Christianity because philosophically it has been constructed specifically to exclude me and my people. As I mentioned the French earlier, how do you create a Christianity that justifies slavery? My friend, may he rest in peace, James Cone, would like to say all white theology is satanic. And he said it was satanic because it ignores and has nothing to say about slavery or Jim and Jane Crow. I would add to James Cone's list that if Christianity has nothing to say about tearing children from their mothers and putting them in cages, then that Christianity is also satanic. So I'm not really saying anything new here. This conversation's been going on for decades. But what I'm trying to say is that because it's satanic, we have to reject it. We have to move away from the spiritualization of oppression. Because how white Americans read their Bible damns us all who find themselves on the margins. And then what we try to do is we try to find the darkest face with the whitest voice to put them on a pedestal so that we can go ahead and say, look, even they agree with us. Over lunch, we were talking about Neil Hurston, who said, not all skin folk are kinfolk. Not only must we wrestle with white Christianity, we must wrestle with those from our own community whose mind has been so colonized that they accept this white Christianity as truth. And I don't want to be angry at my own people for doing this, because literally there go I. Remember, I also adopted this white Christianity. And how can I not? To get my doctorate, I had to become fluent in Moltmann and Bultmann and whatever other man. I mean, I had to learn all these German thinkers. I had to learn white Christian ethics and white Christian history and white Christian pastoral think counseling and white Christian hermeneutics. I had to learn all this. And yet, my cohort never had to read any author with a Latino name. And yet, I'm the one that was always seen as not being smart enough or educated enough. They got their PhD knowing nothing about my culture. I had to learn everything about theirs plus everything about mine, and because of my work, I had to read everything dealing with black theology and thought, and Asian theology and thought, and queer theology and thought, and yet I was the one that was seen as not measuring up to my cohort. How can I not then develop an inferiority complex or an imposter complex within the academy? Because I'm not quoting Niebuhr at the top of my head. My mind is working now. I love my Jesus. But what do I do when the God of liberation fails to liberate? What do I do when the God of liberation fails to liberate? When the rhetoric of hope does not carry me forward anymore? What do I do when all these promises I'm holding on to just doesn't work for me? How do I struggle with this? I find comfort in my faith. But we have to understand what I mean by that. I have been heavily influenced by a philosopher by the name of Miguel de Unamuno. He lived in the early 1900s. Unamuno, Miguel de Unamuno. Miguel de Unamuno would say, you cannot prove there is a God. Also, you cannot prove there is not a God. You just have to choose to believe or not believe. If you choose to believe, we call that faith. And in reality, if you can prove there's a God, then it's no longer faith. It's science. So Miguel de Unamuno says, you know what? Because it's a choice, more profitable to believe than not to believe. It has better consequences. With Miguel, I have chosen to believe in the God that may or may not be there. Because I don't know. And in all honesty, I don't care. When I was younger, I really cared about, if I die, am I going to go to heaven? And, I don't care anymore. I don't care because when I die, I'm sure there's a heaven. I picked out my mansion. Everything's cool. But if I'm wrong and there's no God, I'm not going to know about it anyway. So I rather, instead of trying to do the Eurocentric philosophical thing of explaining and proving God, I rather struggle with the character of this God whom I chose to believe in. And when I struggle with that, like Jacob, fighting with God all night, I should walk away limping if the struggle is real. Miguel de Unamuno has this beautiful prayer, the prayer to the God who is not there, in where he prays this beautiful prayer, knowing that maybe there's not a God. Now again, don't get me wrong, I chose to believe. And I'm very comfortable with that belief and that choice. But in doing so, it allows me to begin to construct God in the image of the character that I believe God is. And that is a God of justice, a God of liberation. And that is the God that I have chosen to believe in. And because of that, that becomes the model by which I do my praxis. And like Mati, even if I get it wrong, it doesn't matter, because it's a lot better than the Euro-Christianity that I have been taught at universities and at colleges. Deep breath. So what do we do? We'll talk more about that tomorrow, but for now, as an ethicist who wants to bring about change, I am well aware that social change has never occurred without blood flowing in the streets. That scares me. Now, you can say, well, how about nonviolent movements? Well, a lot of blood flowed through the streets. It just wasn't the blood of the oppressors. Let me quote Cesar Chavez. I am not a nonviolent man. I'm a violent man trying to be nonviolent. I just be clear about that. I'm not calling for violence. I am a violent man trying to be nonviolent. But by the same token, I know that there never has been a time of history where those benefiting from oppression said, you know, we have way too much power and possessions and privilege. It's time we just share with you all. Yeah. I've never seen that point in history. Instead, what I have seen is bloodshedding to take a step closer to justice only to be pushed back 2 steps later on. You're beginning to understand why I'm hopeless. Because if I'm calling for liberation, I'm calling for bloodshed. And I don't want that. I want, revolutions usually eat their young. I mean, I've lived through a revolution. It wasn't great. So you can see the inner conflict that I am wrestling with, knowing that what I'm calling for is not a new cosmetic to a corrupt democracy that continues to oppress those on the margins. And yet what I'm calling for is scary. I'm not sure how to reconcile that. And I wish I had an answer. I don't. I'm just sharing my struggle here. I'm a violent man trying to be nonviolent. But I'll tell you this. You touch the hair of one of my kids, I'll rip out your heart in Christian love. so I know my limitations. I know where I could fall so easily. If I want to argue that we cannot indulge in violence because the people who will suffer the most are those who are on the margins, then we have to begin to think of a new way by which to engage in praxis to change these structures. And tomorrow we will talk about this in greater detail. How do we engage in praxis that is revolutionary but still keeps us alive in the process? That's really the ethical question I'm wrestling with. And the answer, communities who have been oppressed throughout centuries have always been doing what I'm going to suggest. So I'm not inventing anything new. And that is to play the trickster. I said that I need to create my Christianity from my own indigenous roots. I am a Roman Catholic, Southern Baptist, Santero. So let me explain what I mean by that. In Eurocentric thinking, you're either one thing or another. You're either Presbyterian or you're a Methodist. Can't be both. You're either Catholic or you're Muslim. You can't be both. We Caribbean folk are a little bit more fluid in our religiosity. I grew up as a Roman Catholic. In my 20s, I converted and became a Southern Baptist. By the way, for very deep theological reasons. The girl I wanted to go out with would only date me if I went to church with her and she just happened to be a Southern Baptist. See, if she would have been a Presbyterian, I would have been part of your group. And I'm a Santero. Oh, into Santeria. I don't know if you're familiar with Santeria is. Santeria is the religiosity of the Yoruba people who were brought to Cuba enslaved. And they continue, unlike the United States where they literally beat out the African religions from the people who were enslaved here, in the Caribbean, they were let to continue to practice their own religiosity. So we have different orishas, different quasi-deities. And my particular deity, my particular quasi-deity is El Egua. Now, El Egua is the ultimate trickster, which basically means you can never trust anything I'm saying. But it also means that I do my Christian ethics through my Orisha El Egua and bring in that trickster element to how I do praxis. Okay? Which is, like I said, what the oppressed have always done. The African American communities have what? Bear and Bear Rabbit. Mexicanos have Cantinfla. Puerto Ricanos have Juan Bobo. We Cubans have Pepito. The indigenous communities has Coyote and Spider. Oppressed people have always looked to their tricksters to find the inspiration to act without getting killed in the process. So I look to El Egua, which is my Orisha. So when I say that I'm constructing Christianity using my indigenous roots, I was a Roman Catholic for 20 plus years. That's still part of me. The importance of the teachings of the church, the importance of the care for the poor and that tradition. I'm still a Southern Baptist. The evangelizing the good news of liberation and spreading that liberation as far as I can. I am an evangelist for liberation. And I'm a child of Elegua. And that informs how I do ethics. Now, I know for some Eurocentric mindsets, it would say, but wait a minute, that's so contradictory. To which Miguel de Unamuno says, well, of course it is. That only means I'm human. To be human is to be contradictory, to have different ways of thinking at the same time going on in your mind. And in the tension of all of these contradictions, do I find my ethics and my theology, and I follow Jose Marti in making my wine out of plantains. That is where I'm at right now. Knowing that liberation will never occur without disruption and violence. Knowing I don't want that. Knowing that it's not going to change then. Knowing that it is hopeless. How do I then move forward in this hopelessness? We'll talk more about that one tomorrow morning. But for now, I'll be more than happy to entertain questions.
Thank you. I don't know if clapping is the right response to this, but it is real, and you are opening up this space with honesty. So there will be a chance for questions, and there will be mics. So when you have a question, please raise your hand. I have about 200 questions that I would like to ask, but I will begin with one till others have a chance to gather their thoughts and formulate their questions. So liberation into what in your imagination? And I wonder if answering that question also determines the strategies that the oppressed can lean into as they seek that, and as a way also of not turning their movement into another institution and yet another iteration of the very thing they have started to resist.
Yeah. Liberation into what? So, as we all know, Hegel has let's begin with Hegel. Has given us this beautiful understanding of history, that it moves in an upward progression, and we are heading towards utopia or liberation or whatever. And it's not, it's salvation history, basically, but it's not just a religious term. Marxism is salvation history. Things are going to get better and better. The state's going to wither away. We're going to live in a more communist utopia. Capitalism is salvation history. The rising tide will lift up all boats. Both are trends of modernity. We have in our DNA this understanding that we are in an upward progression. Yay, one day we will reach liberation, or the communist utopian, or the middle class utopia of capitalism, or whatever. Unfortunately, I drank the Foucault Kool-Aid. And what I mean by that is I don't believe in history. History can be moving upward or downward or backwards or in circles or have major gaps. What we call history, and I'm getting to your answer, I'm sorry, I'm being philosophical for a moment. What we call history is nothing but picking certain points in the past, stringing them together so that we could justify where we are now and make a case for where we want to be tomorrow. Okay. And whoever gets to connect whatever points in the past gets to create history. Now, I say this because if I reject the progression of time in any linear, especially upward trend, then there is no guarantee that there will be a state of liberation. If anything, it'll probably be the opposite. I'm sorry, but here's where I disagree with MLK. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I don't think the arc of the moral universe cares less which way it bends. And if it's going to bend towards justice, we are the ones that have to do the bending, because it's not going to bend by itself. And even after we do the bending, and even after we go ahead and move 5 steps forward to something more just, neoliberalism is 10 steps ahead of us. They already know how we're going to do, how we're going to protest. And because of that, they already know how to respond to what we're going to do 5 steps from now. So we may move forward towards justice, but we're going to get pushed back a lot. I could give you a beautiful example. For the first time, people who never voted got together and voted for the first biracial moderate man. And the white lash that we are experiencing is still going on now. So every few steps forward, push back. So when you say, what's that liberation we're going towards? I'm just trying to take a couple of steps and where I'll be happy if we're just treated like humans. I'll settle for that. I would settle for not deporting women and children at 3 in the morning to border towns that are dangerous, just to spite them. I'll be happy with just that for now. So the question is liberation towards what? I'm still trying to figure out how not to keep killing our people. I'll be happy if we could just get to that point.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yes, I find it very troubling what you've said today, but I'm not sure I agree with everything either. But in terms of resolutions, would you comment on what's happened in South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation? There was some bloodshed, but it was not the bloodshed that could have been expected. And I appreciate comments.
Sure, of course. Well, first of all, let me say that I don't always agree with everything I say either. So we're okay. I'm not an expert in South Africa. I did get to teach at Johannesburg University in Johannesburg. So I was able to spend a lot of time, I was there for a long time with a lot of South African. And I could just say this. We went to the Apartheid Museum. And when I say we, it was several of us, some students that I met, and they took me there. One of the students, I don't know if anybody's been in that exhibit, but there's one part of the exhibit where they have a cell, and they have a hook on the ceiling where they used to hang people with their arms behind their back. When we got to that particular exhibit, the person I was with sat on the cot and started crying because he spent months in a cell just like that. And he said a comment that really shook me. He said, Mandela told us we had to forgive, so we did. And I can't live with myself now. And that really struck me. Now, I can't, obviously, he's not speaking for all South Africans. Obviously, I'm just talking about this one individual who forgave and is now having major psychological problems. For reconciliation to happen, we have to forgive. But I wonder, do we have to forgive for the benefit of the abuser or for the benefit of the abused? And usually it's for the benefit of the abuser, so they will stop abusing. That bothers me a little bit because I'm thinking of the abused spouse being told she has to forgive her abuser when that may not be something that could be done. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of studies that show that when you forgive an abuser, you find healing. So if that's the case, by all means, you need to then forgive. But if forgiving the abuser does not bring you healing, then I would argue you may have to wait till you get to heaven to then give the forgiveness. And that's okay. It may not be possible in this lifetime because more important to me than any reconciliation with the abuser is the well-being of the one that was abused. And we could wait until we get to the kingdom of heaven. I may have to, have to wait even 100, 200 years after you get there. Who knows? But I'm not pushing for reconciliation that quickly. Now, as a community, we may decide as a community to forgive and move on and try to, but not for the individual. So there's two, I really think there's two ways of forgiveness. So again, I'm not an expert in South Africa. I do know that even with the reconciliation, the economic powers still remain in the hands of those who were in power before. And I do know that those who were on the other side of apartheid are still economically depressed. So it's again, very complex, and that's not my area of expertise, but I at least I want to talk about what reconciliation might look like.
I'm interested in how you see your work alongside that of Starlet Thomas.
Of who?
Starlet Thomas.
Starlet
Thomas.
Oh, the one that writes that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take Me to the Water.
Yes. I've spoke to her a bunch of times. I think our works are pretty parallel. I think there might be some disagreement, but overall, she's fighting for the same thing I'm fighting for. Justice, and we just may come from it from different angles, but it doesn't matter. I mean, and let me be very clear. The way I'm doing my praxis, I don't have the hubris to say this is the only way to do it. I mean, these are just guideposts as far as I'm concerned. It helps guide us, but you have to figure it out for yourself as to how you want to move forward. And if you want to move forward with me, I'll be happy to talk to you. And if you don't, and you want to go a different direction, all power to you. I mean, Cone in his book on Martin and Malcolm did a great job in showing that there's many ways of coming in from different angles, but still working towards the same goal and complementing each other. So I would say that we complement each other, definitely.
Thank you for being here. I wasn't going to say anything, but the Spirit wouldn't let me. So there's three things that I'm looking at. It's naming it, reclaiming what was stolen, and then moving forward. For someone in my position, in my space, what do you think that would look like? Because I'm still angry. I don't know if I can forgive, but as a person who claims to be a daughter of the King, it is my responsibility to forgive. I've got to show people how to live this way.
First of all, I just want to be very careful. I don't know the situation, so I don't want to impose my thinking. The only thing I would say is, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to forgive. You can forgive once you get to heaven. You can, if life is eternal, if we claim life is eternal, that's one of the doctrines of the faith, right? Okay, so we have the whole eternity before we have to forgive somebody. We have time. It doesn't have to be in this temporal time period. I would say that only forgive if it's going to heal you, if it's going to bring you peace. And if it doesn't, then wait for the healing.
A few years ago, Hull House in Chicago did a program where they were interviewing 30 organizations that were working with immigrants. And they were asking the question, what do you need to service the immigrant community in a better way? And they concluded with housing, job skills, and language skills as a way to start. This is my question, though. It seems to me that we cannot resolve, I feel hopeless about the national, and more so daily, as we can all agree to. But my question is, what can we do locally? And what can we do individually? And I can wonder about that with some imagination that I can't do nationally.
Well, that's a tricky question because when you say what can we do, who is the we? Are we talking about the dominant culture or are we talking about the immigrant community? Because they need to do several very different things. And also locally, I'm not quite sure what your locale is. So again, one size doesn't fit all. It's not like whatever we can decide what we should do locally would fit into your location. Now you said you're Chicago, it's a big city. I think part of the things that I'm looking at in my own work is moving away from thinking that I need to provide something. Clothes, food. Now those things are important, don't get me wrong. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, I'm not denying that. But I need to be careful that I don't see that as the only thing I do because then it becomes very paternalistic. Oh, look how good I am. I'm providing them with the job skills or the work or the security. Okay. So, and again, I'm not saying don't do that. That's important. But I'm saying is we need to be careful that doesn't become the only thing we're doing. I would imagine, and I can't speak for it, every locale is different, but I would imagine if I'm in need, what would help me the most is just you sitting down and hearing my story and getting to know me and getting to know my family. I'm always amazed that we always send mission groups like to Mexico. And I'm thinking, Mexicans are already Christian. Like 97% of the country, more so than here. Maybe they should be sending missionaries here. Oh, whatever they are, and we're throwing them back. Okay, but the point is, we want to help them over there, but we don't want to help them here because if they're here next to us, they may call us at 3 in the morning because they need help. It's better that they be over there someplace. So again, every locale is different, every group is different, but I would imagine if we're going to talk about solidarity, that implies relationship. And that implies accompanying them in their struggle, not just providing goods and services.
My question would be, what advice would you give in lieu of the words and the message that you have shared today? If somebody experiences that and feels aligned with the message in a very visceral way, that if you know someone, a young person or a student, you described your own circumstance of having to survive in an environment where you had to learn about and absorb other people's culture and it didn't go the other way, that if a young person or a student is in an environment where they're aware of the existence of the kind of myths, the structures perpetuating that you've described, what kind of advice would you give to a young person that is cognizant of that and has to try to exist in a similar sort of circumstance?
So I'm going to try to understand your question, and that is, what advice would I give somebody in the dominant culture to speak to our young people from a different culture whose minds are colonized into accepting the dominant culture's narrative? Is that fair? Oh, okay.
Are you asking a question?
Oh, I see. Okay. So what advice would I give to a student at a seminary who is being fed the dominant narrative as far as, what was it? Okay, good. Hypothetically. Hypothetically. Okay, let's not be hypothetical. And I'll talk about my seminary. How's that? There are some of my colleagues who tell my students that I am not a scholar because I am a social activist. You see, in the academy, there's this division that if you do activism work, you cannot therefore be a scholar. Okay? And some of my colleagues have said this in their classrooms. So what you're saying is very real. What do you do? What do I tell my students who are of color, who are being told that if they are engaged in activism, therefore they cannot be scholarly and they must stop? How's that? Is that a good way of it? The question? Okay, good enough. And it's not hypothetical.
Dr. Miguel.
Yes. Oh, let me answer them. Let me finish answering real fast. Just give me a second. So, I guess what I do tell them, especially if the student is of color, you have to know the dominant culture's theology and ethics better than the dominant culture does, as well as your own, so that you can hold them accountable to their own rhetoric while introducing your own. You have to do twice the work, knowing you're only going to receive a quarter of the recognition. But that's the situation we find ourselves in. So I can out-Hegel anybody under the table. Even though there's nothing he said that I agree with. I've read more Bootman than I think I ever want to read in my life. And they'll let me get going on Niebuhr, or Rauschenbusch, or Gustafson, or my dear friend Hauerwas. But if I cannot debate them intellectually, I will never be recognized. And I feel like I wrote a book called, what's the name of that book? Latina Social Ethics, Rejecting Eurocentric Reasoning or Thinking or something like that. And the first half of the book is a critique of Rauschenbusch, Niebuhr, and Hauerwas. And I begin by saying, I wish I could skip this whole chapter. But if I don't deal with this chapter, I'm not going to be considered an intellectual. I'm not going to be considered that I know what I'm talking about. So I have to go ahead and show my chops and do the work so you can say, oh, he knows what he's talking about, and then I can get to my stuff. And that's just the way it is right now in the academy. I'm sorry.
Yes. As you were speaking to us, may I say you could hear a rat piss on cotton. As you were lecturing, speaking to us, you could hear a rat piss on cotton. What I mean by that is, in that silence of listening, all of our hearts were being pricked, if the truth be told. So what I want to ask you, because that's all I have the heart.
Mm-hmm.
How now shall we live in the midst of all the chaos? And I have sold myself out to the church that I show up at every Sunday to say God wants us to know. What shall we do? Because on any given day, any of us, whether you have much or less, can find ourselves broke down on the road of life. And the people who we think are coming, they are not coming. Mm-hmm. And the very face that you don't like to look at, they are the ones who show up. Please, what shall the heart do on this day that you are speaking to us?
And I'll say again, I always hesitate a little bit to tell people what to do because I don't know at people's individual situation. But if I'm hearing you correctly, in the chaos of this time, I would say embrace the hopelessness that comes with that chaos. And for the reason of the heart, and here's why. All too often, what hope does is that it gives us the illusion we might overcome and achieve the goal. And I'm not saying this as a derogatory term, but many people who enter into social service usually don't last long in that profession, right? And the reason is because many times they enter thinking they're going to change the world. And when the world doesn't change, the chaos of the times destroys their heart. Once I embrace hopelessness, number one, it was totally liberating. It's liberating because I realize I am not the Savior. I am not going to fix this chaos. And it's not up to me to fix it. And number two, once I realize the chaos is going to continue, then I could live into it and not be broken by it. I have been working on issues of immigration. 25 years now. I long for the simpler forms of oppression of 25 years from now, from 25 years ago, than the horrors that it has arrived. I can still work towards immigrant justice because I know it's not going to be achieved. But that means, and I know it's not going to be achieved because nothing I could do is going to bring it about. But I still work in it because I'm not hoping for it. Does that make, I know this sounds contradictory, but it really liberates me from that responsibility of fixing the chaos. And it liberates my heart so that I could feel and hopefully, no pun intended, become callous by the chaos that I'm witnessing. Now that's me. I can't speak for anybody else or, but if it resonates, yay.
Thank you, Dr. Miguel. Join me in thanking Dr. Miguel, please. Before we close with hymn 103, I would like to get your attention to the announcements that are followed on the bulletin for today. And there is a correction on the next page. The dinner starts at 5:45, not 5. So 5:45.
One other announcement. We will have a reception just following this in the Rose reception area. And then there are breakout groups. It seems like a time not to be alone, to think through these questions. And on your name tag, you should have a number written down. They're all in the Early Center or the Lake area. So go to the Rose reception area. If you don't have a number, we'll help you find a breakout group. And we have 6 wonderful faculty members to be our guides for that. So I hope you'll join us for that time.
Yes, 103. Go in peace.